Hello and welcome back to the final afternoon of Ensuring Success, your annual CPE marathon. We have 3 sessions left this afternoon. And first of all, however, before we start into our first afternoon session, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. We cannot make this event possible without all of their help. And our sponsors are ADP, Avalara, BotKeeper, Canopy, CPA.com, eFile4Biz, WriteWorks, SafeSend, SureLink, Wolters Kluwer, Xero, and Zoho. Also, I'd like to explain real quickly how CPE works. If this is the first session you're attending, you haven't heard this before. If this happens to be the 12th session you're attending, you probably got this memorized, but that's okay. For CPE, we will post 3 codes during the session. Each code is a 3-digit code, a numerical code. We'll post it at the bottom of the screen. We'll let you know when we're posting it, and you'll know that it's on the screen because you will hear this sound. All right, and when you hear that, it's time to write down the CPE code. So you'll collect 3 codes for this session. After the session's over, or after the event's over, or next month, or whenever you want to come back to the Ensuring Success website, click the CPE option on the top menu, and at that point you'll be able to enter all the codes you collected, and you can download your CPE certificates from there. This session also qualifies for IRS CE credit, so if you entered your PTIN number when you registered for this session, we will be sending all of those PTIN people, all of the information for those people off to the IRS for CE credit. I would also like to mention that if you have any questions for our speakers, you can enter them below this video screen in the Ask a Question box, and they'll come to us right here on the desk, and we can present them to the speakers. If you have any tech questions for our team, either a CPE question or a CE question or any technical issues that you're having, up at the top of your screen there's an email address, info@EnsuringSuccess.com. We have people standing by to take those questions. We are on social media at #DecemberCPE. So if you'd like to pay kudos to us on social media, be sure to use DecemberCPE as the hash code. We'd love to hear from you, and you can also see pictures from the event and other comments people have made about the event so far. If you happen to be very astute, you may have noticed that there's a new CPA Practice Advisor logo behind me. We just changed our logo this past week and revamped our website. So not now because you're busy in this session, but at some point in the future, we'd love to have you go to CPA Practice Advisor's website and check it out. By the way, I'm Gail Perry. I'm Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor. Right now, I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly and then have them tell you a little bit about them before we get into this session on tax resolution. So I'm joined by Tanya Baber, Vaughn Long, and my co-moderator, Alexander DeFelice. And if you'd like to start, Tanya, and tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, I've been at this game for over 30 years, but I started out a solar practitioner, so now it's fun to be able to share that knowledge that I gained by some pain, it feels like at times, and that's what I'm really doing now is I love the mentoring and being able to share that knowledge now with all of you attending today. So a little bit of everything though, tax, accounting, you name it, it feels like that I've dove into it at one point.
Okay.
My name is Vaughn Long. I'm an enrolled agent. I own my own tax practice, Tax Solutions Alliance. Do a lot of the same things that Tanya does. Of course, we do tax returns accounting, but got our start with resolution. Was very fortunate to learn as a mentor from a former IRS revenue officer. He worked for the IRS for 28 years. Felt it wasn't as much fun going after taxpayers, so he went into private practice. I met him along the way, and we worked every case together for like 10 years. And we do, 150 plus cases a year, large dollar, and live the representation side and have a good time with it, right? So happy to share information, and please ask your questions. I think we talked last year, there were lots of questions. We made sure this year to save time for lots of questions and so on. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be the fun part, is being able to help answer whatever we possibly can that comes in. And
for the 11th, 12th, 12th time out of 14 times, I think. Yeah, I'm losing track. I'm Alexandra DeFelice, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Payne & Fears Law Firm in Southern California, co-moderator, designated bell ringer.
All right, we're ready to start. We want to talk about what's happening in collection. What are the latest trends and issues relating to tax collection?
Tanya, the main thing that I wrote down, and we've talked about this, I talk pre-COVID, post-COVID now, right? Is that weird? It just feels like AD/BC.
Yeah. Life is that way.
So pre-COVID, I never had to ask, I thought, for pending IA codes. So the reason you would want that is it prevents a levy. I've proposed something correctly. If they put the pending IA code, which would show up in an account transcript.
And what's an IA code?
So it's a pending installment agreement code. So thank you for reminding me to say that, right? So you've proposed an installment agreement. You've done it all correctly. If so, the IRS has to put this code in, which means they cannot levy until they either agree to this, then they won't levy, or they deny the installment agreement, which you get 30 days to appeal. I never had to worry about before asking for this code. It was just done. Post-COVID, I want to say, I don't know what you think, I think 70+% of the time, I'm not getting this code, and it's like a game now, like, okay, I can levy if I want to, and well, not if you put the pending IA code, and then we pull transcripts. It's not there. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, unfortunately, that it seems to be so much more of a struggle in really getting an installment agreement. It used to be one of the easier things we could accomplish. And I agree in the same way that we have a perspective of the post-COVID and after COVID. During that frame of time, we couldn't do anything because the IRS was closed. But now it feels like we can't really accomplish things because we're hitting these brick walls and these standstills. And that pending IA code, I'm really seeing a similar trend, in all honesty, that we need to ask for that in order to make sure that they aren't going to do something crazy in the background.
Yeah. And for the audience too, there's a differentiation. You've got two main collection groups, right? You got revenue officers, RO, and you got ACS, Automated Collection Systems, right? The National Collection Group. So for ROs, we're finding a lot of brand new, and we'll get into new ROs in a minute, a lot of brand new ones are not doing things, not following up, we're not hearing from them. So this is where I want to ask for that pending IA code.
Right.
But we were chatting too for ACS. How do you hold them accountable? Because it's a verbal conversation you're having, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think your theory was, which I really liked, maybe we should be asking for pending IA codes for ACS because you don't always close the deal if you need to do a direct debit, right?
Absolutely, and it's that.
It's a theory.
Often that's where we're working with clients is through that automated collection service. And maybe when you were mentioning before, what are the level of the service we're dealing with? A lot of new ones, maybe they're not experienced. Maybe they tell us, oh yeah, we're going to be able to do that. And then they go to their manager and maybe the manager doesn't approve it. So that's one of the difficulties I think we're facing. But I'm seeing that it's probably going to be appropriate to have the recommendation that we're asking for those codes to make sure that it's in that pending status. Maybe we have to go back to the client to get a signature saying they authorize direct debit, but that way at least we know where we left it off is really how the service is going to mark it on the account for sure.
It's proving it. And because a lot of what we do is verbal. And so but because it's verbal, you don't get anything that says, yes, we've agreed in theory and let my manager take a look at this. You don't get anything in writing. And I never needed to worry about this before. And so it was funny, I wrote a note down for ACS, this national collection group, that at first it's a better collection alternative because you're probably seeing more experience still there until lately you've seen this drop off of like, have you ever had a situation where you called ACS and you find a really good ACS person and they'll let you do 4 or 5 cases in a row? We had an experience, we did it, we felt great. So we have a process step that if we don't see the written letter coming in confirming it, we call back, which, by the way, takes up a lot of extra time, back to the process of how much we get paid. We called back, not a single one was active. They didn't do anything on it. It wasn't a manager approval issue. The person just didn't do it. So all of a sudden you have to redo all of that work, and this is where it's coming back to maybe that pending IA code is the question, and that's the phrase you want to use, right? So everybody out there, pending IA code is the phrase, whether it's ACS or a RO person, hey, I'd like that in there, and ask them, if I'm not going to have it, why? Have that specific conversation.
Right, and the advantage is then it's kind of a proof that you've had that verbal approval, and they say, okay, we look like we're going to be able to grant you this installment agreement. They can indicate it as such, so it's not just, well, if they don't do their job, that it's as if to the client and to the world that makes it look like we didn't do our job. So
Correct.
that pending IA code, I think, is going to be an important focus that we have to put that energy into just to make sure.
And you'll see it, you find that pending IA code in the account transcript. So we'll probably touch on it later, maybe now
Right.
too, is how to pull account transcripts. How do
Yeah.
you do it?
We do that through a third-party software, but you
So
have
yes.
to continually, because that information is changing. So as part of our casework, we're always pulling new data and seeing, okay, like if you're looking for a code, if you're looking for a change, looking for what's going on, you want to see, in the same way we'll tell clients, we want to see what they're seeing because it helps us to do a better job, most definitely.
Yeah, pulling transcripts, it feels like you go into this archaic process with the IRS on their website. So we use a third-party system as well. It just makes it so much more seamless. It's easier. Are you in that process? I mean, with many as you do, are you pulling transcripts daily, like having to do that verification code? It's everything, every day I got to pull that code.
Absolutely.
It's part of our office process, so we can
And
get
it's
them.
that we have the ones that we know we're going to be meeting with in the next few days that we got to get new data for,
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
it's a daily task that we have to go
Oh my
in
gosh.
and get new data and see what's going on.
It's like if you're going to dedicate yourself to doing representation, these are the processes you have to build into place. And whether, when you're only doing a few cases, maybe you can wing spreadsheets to track stuff and internal stuff. But as you grow your practice, this is something you really want to do. Having the softwares, this is what comes into value. There are multiple vendors you can work with that can help track all this because it's very deadline based.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll probably get more into that too. Deadlines for, promised information that you got to go back to the client, get information,
so
get it back to the person you're working with on the IRS side, but also, and it's weird to have to say this, but babysitting the IRS level that, okay, you got to make sure that they did what they said that they're going to do. So there's so many deadlines, and you got to have a tracking system, most definitely.
Do you recommend voluntary payments when you propose it to a revenue officer and you're making that monthly, or you're like, I'll just wait till they contact me? What do you?
Usually if you have the clients on board, especially as we're talking about installment agreements in general, if you have the client on board, that's a great way to prove that they can make the payment.
Yes.
But also because if you have a promised installment agreement, they don't follow through, that's very problematic. But if your client's still making those payments, it's going to put you in a much better position. So voluntary payments is kind of where we're leaning towards for quite a few of them as well.
Completely agree, right? The revenue officer who taught us said the secret sauce, people. The secret sauce to this is if you're making a voluntary payment every month while the revenue officer is doing whatever, you're reinforcing your proposal. So if they drop the ball with something, you can prove, like it's almost like, maybe it's better said, you're prepping your case for appeals in case it goes bad. And then every month I made this voluntary. I made a proposal, I made a voluntary for 5 months. You all haven't accepted it. Deny me, that's fine. But I've made the case, this is what it should be. And I've had some ROs come back and go, you know what? Yeah, we just got to accept this. We've let this go too far. And
Right.
maybe that's your experience too.
Yeah, and there's many cases that you want to be able to have that exact amount. You've done the math, they've preliminarily even verbally agreed to it. It's that there are unfortunately failures of that being set in stone. The best thing you can do is that voluntary payment, because then if you have to come back later to it, well, not only is it that we've done the math and they can do this, they have consistently done this. So
Exactly.
when we proposed it, we were not setting them up for failure. Look, they've accomplished it. So definitely.
Before we move on,
Yep.
let's take a really quick break. On the bottom of the screen, we'd like to post the first CPE code for this session. So be sure to write that down and save that if you're planning on collecting either CE or CPE credit for this.
And surprise, surprise, some questions are already coming in from the
many
audience.
we
Can
have?
we shift?
Wonderful.
Oh, not a lot. And some of them are just comments, but I'm
Okay.
going to let you take these,
Let's take a
Vaughn.
look.
Yeah, we love to be able to, and please do post the questions or comments, because that's really what we want to make sure. and
You know the
answer.
first question is our next topic.
How
Perfect.
absolutely perfect.
Taxpayer advocate.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to touch on the question, but quick tip, and I'm looking right at you. Quick tip: if you're trying to apply and get the advocate to pick up a case, calling is the worst thing you can do. They're overwhelmed, so they're being trained right now to talk you out of putting the case in. So it's old school. You fax in form 911. I wish I was making this up, but that's the number.
Oh, you just gave it away. I just asked the poll
No,
question.
let
if
them.
you're supposed to
No,
please.
because the whole point of that poll question is a whole other reason, but that's okay. Fax in, yes, we're helping you with the poll question here, but I hope you pick the third answer. Fax in the 911 because they can't talk you out of doing it.
Right.
And now, the next step is how long is it going to take? 'Cause it's certainly not 3 days anymore.
No, and they're so overwhelmed with casework that what they tell you and what they quote you, and this seems to be that it's holding pretty true, is about 6 weeks from the time that you put in that request before you may hear from an agent, before you may have a case assigned. But I think with everything, one of our themes is going to be you've got to follow up. You've got to be willing to follow up, because if you don't hear, and generically I think it's safe to say about 6 weeks is what you should be able to expect, you got to follow up again. And that has been very recent casework that I was doing, where I had an individual and his business that both of them I had to put in a 911 faxed request to TAS, and the individual was assigned, but the business one floating out there in space somewhere. So when I talked with my, in the case of the caseworker that got the TAS agent that got my case for the individual, it's like, what happened with the business one? Oh, that's not assigned to me. So I was able to show her the proof that it was faxed. So when you fax it, you also have the lovely thing of the proof for when it was faxed.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they were able to get me an agent assigned, but that is your best method if you put in a phone call. It may be a very slow or very unlikely process that you get a call back. You're not going to talk to somebody, and you will be leaving a message when you call.
So despite giving them the answer, 18% of the people still thought it was better to call, and 11% picked option 3, which you didn't know about, maybe not, Tanya, which is folding a 911 form into a paper airplane and fly it towards your local IRS office.
I thought that was what everyone should go with, right? I mean, that
Right?
feels like it's better than calling.
It really does.
The assumption is calling's the way to go. They're going to talk you out of it. That they're expressly being told internally, and I've had people share this with me, hey, we don't want you to call in, or we are overwhelmed with cases. Fax in the 911. But recognize it's going to take minimum 6 weeks, and then you're right, we're finding we had, like, one case comes to mind. We waited about 6 weeks. We fax in again to the fax number, and you find the fax number at the IRS website under TAS. It's specific to your state. In this case, I'm out of Richmond, Virginia, so it's our Richmond office. We were faxing every month after that, following up. I think we put in April of 24. I just got a call after monthly fax follow-ups last week in December, and the TAS office rep said, you know what, you should have gotten a call from us in July. I'm glad it wasn't a levy request to hold something, right? I mean, this was a process step that we had to go through, but you do need to follow up. Such a great point.
And it's sad that that is the state of where we're at, but the TAS office is really kind of our last resort when we've done everything right. We've gone through the process. We can prove that we've been going through the process. The TAS office is the ones that have the power and the ability to order the IRS to do something, but they have so much casework that that's really where we're experiencing the difficulties right now.
And they've been overwhelmed even more because so much went to TAS, Taxpayer Advocate, in COVID and after COVID because the IRS is closed. I don't think they still haven't really caught up their backlog. So back to the question, I think we probably covered that.
First of all, they're saying, why fax? That's obsolete technology. Why?
Oh, it's
So
the IRS.
I don't disagree with that, but the whole goal is to get the IRS to take your case. So I'll joke, you know, the local copier and fax salesman loves us because we still use fax technology because the IRS is built around it. Power of attorneys, they're talking about you can upload them, right? I'm actually finding that faxing power of attorneys gets processed faster on average than uploading power of attorneys. I don't know if you've run into that too. And I certainly can't find a client who can do ID.me correctly to authorize me electronically.
And I wish that, it is strange that, are we really saying that we should use the older technology in this case? Yes.
Yeah.
You have the proof that the fax, that then we get down to, how can we really prove we had this communication? Fax is phenomenal.
Yes.
And when you're dealing with TAS, it's the difficulty of, well, if we can reach them because we're leaving a message, then it's just really lost out there in space. But with the fax, that's what helped me in my case. It was a similar time frame. It was July that I attempted to fax, and when I finally got the agent assigned, I think it was in October, I was able to prove, well, this is where I sent it in July. Oh, no. Yeah, you're right, not a problem. Let's see if we can get you assigned to somebody. So the fax provides us a different level of proof to make it that, hey, we've done this action. Here's the proof of it.
Well, so someone's asking, why not email?
Do you want to take that one first? And I'll try.
Gosh, yeah, email is tougher because if you have an agent and you have a specific email, that's great. But usually when you're dealing with them, we're reaching out as that first level of communication. We're not going to have a specific person, and you can't just email the IRS to a generic email inbox. You won't reach anybody whatsoever. So if that's what you see.
ROs, ACS, they don't work off of email. They're terrified of it because the ID issues that come with that. Their whole process still, no matter all the updates they're doing right now, is built around eFax, because the eFax comes into their email already scanned as a PDF. So they ROs still want me to eFax to them my packages. And I think it's about this is how sad this is. It's about a 75-page limit per fax. So if you got 300 pages, which is regular for an RO case with bank statements and records, especially for business 403B cases, we'll have 4 or 5 faxes in a row to the revenue officer. And we're holding their hand. Fax 1 has this, fax 2, 3, 4, and 5 with a 75-page limit, or it won't go through. And you're right, I'm keeping that eFax confirmation. So if anybody ever contests that they didn't get it, we've got backup. And I wish they would do email. I wish the electronic upload would work, but those are all real spotty right now.
I like this question.
Okay,
Someone must have been watching some of the other sessions. They said, how do we bill for all that extra time following up on the IRS? Not kidding. It's a real
We're both
question.
flat rate, right?
Yeah, for the most part, and it's really making me rethink it because of all the extra time that we're having to put into these, where it used to be, okay, we consider a simple installment agreement. Well, we know on average how much time that should take us, but now with having to follow up again, and how come that isn't done yet, and following up again, and if it becomes where we're starting to say, well, do we need to switch that to an hourly based model because of all the extra time that goes into it, unfortunately. This
is like a personal, selfish thing for me. I just don't like tracking my hours, right? So it's funny, I listened to the discussion this morning. Sean was piling away on that. I agree with a lot of what he said. So I was talking to my office literally a couple hours ago, like, hey, do we need to start doing that? And the thought is, I'd say 80% of the time, our flat rates will still cover. Now, we're raising our flat rates. And there's some classes I teach about how to do collection where I get more detail. So here's a nugget. On average, and you hold me accountable to this, 403A, personal revenue officer case, 403B, business revenue officer case, it's a minimum 20 hours for me to touch it. And that's up front. Now, if it's a good referral source, maybe I'll break it up a couple payments. But here's the deal. These people owe the IRS. They won't hesitate to stick you and not pay you when the deal is done. So you need to get paid in full before you final the deal, or you're not getting paid unless they need a renewal of agreement in 12 or 24 months, right? And they need you again. So most of the time, I tell clients up front, we're like bankruptcy attorneys. You need to pay us up front. Here's the fee. Think of what your comfortable hourly rate is and ask for 20 hours. For the most case, has never been a problem. If it is, I probably didn't want them as a client. They weren't going to pay me anyways.
Exactly. And that's a very, very good point, is that we are dealing with a level of clientele that, if they're not really taking care of their government obligations and their tax obligations, then we have to make sure that our policies are such that we're not just doing all this effort and all the work, getting them out of trouble, and then we never see them again. So it's usually that we're doing an upfront model as well, and have been always flat rate, but the same sort of thing we're evaluating. Well, now it's taking more effort. We have
tag on a little bit, maybe. I'm struggling.
Really look to see what we have.
This
to
whole pending IA code thing, right? I mean, that we talked about.
So much follow up.
I'd stay away on the 20 hours if you like that concept of saying that first fee for us is a minimum fee, is what we call it. If I have a contact, and this is my personal opinion, we chat a lot, but we may not agree on this. I don't know. Hit me with it if you want to. If it takes me 5 hours because I've got the contacts to close that deal, that's not a refund. It's not a retainer for us. It's a minimum fee. And that first 20 hours, you're going to know so much about that case. Either I'm going to get the case finished, or I'm going to know a lot more. And I say it's 20-hour blocks because a 403B business case for payroll tax, to do a trust fund interviews as well, and they typically want a 403A personal review because they want to say, hey, we want to see if we're going to assess you trust fund, but we're actually not going to use this A to put you in an agreement, which means you have to do it twice.
Exactly.
That's a 40, 60-hour case.
And the complexity of it as well is you may have one that maybe the amount of the assets they have, and the complexity of it is very minimal, and you have one that is like a spider web of all the different companies and all the different things. So it is hard to say there is just one rate to be able to do all of it, because it does depend case by case, but we go with minimums too. And then when we get to evaluate it, well, based on all these other factors, this is really where we're going to need to be. But we become very well acquainted with the client and their case. This is where where we think that this is going to go. So
Love it. Yeah.
minimums recommended for sure.
Before we move on to the next topic, Gail, I think we needed to take another break.
We are going to take a quick break for CPE. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see the second CPE code for this session. You'll want to be sure to write that down if you're planning on collecting CPE and or CE credit for this session.
So what did you guys have next on your agenda? Because now there's 8,000 questions on tax advocate, and I know you have a lot of other areas.
You know, that's why it was funny.
Yeah.
We were going to start with advocate, and it's great you're all asking so many questions because that is the biggest pain point right now, right? Navigating the advocate. I think the first thing I'm seeing at other conferences and questions without flipping through them is how do I get them to take a case? And that's the faxing. If you're not faxing now, you need to start. If you're going to do representation work, you got to fax. And I'm hoping, personally, that changes. But I'm guessing, my gut, at least 2 more years that we're always going to have to fax is realistic.
Yeah, I don't know what the timetable looks
I'm
like
just
for being
making
able
it
to
up.
change out the technology, but yes, if we've done everything right, where do we go and how do we really help the taxpayer? And that answer is Taxpayer Advocate Service. And one of my cases did everything right. It's kind of like one of those stories where unfortunately for my taxpayer, every single thing went wrong in every part of the process. And even going to appeals, he never had the opportunity to have his right to appeal. How do we fix that? We got to take it to the Taxpayer Advocate Service. So that is your point in time, but how do you get a case? Well, you'd have to be able to show that you've done things right. And so documentation and showing that you've gone through the processes, but yet the system failed them. And that, or, it's causing them a hardship. I'm not sure what kind of things you put in your 911s, but this is a lot of the language that we go for is it a hardship? How did the system fail them? So that's really what they're looking for to take on that case.
I'm actually happy to tell everybody what I put in. I actually write in my 911 form, Tanya Baber said I should contact you because, and it works really well. You've got such a great reputation out there.
Oh my.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Not everybody would do that.
They're asking, with all this bashing of the taxpayer advocates.
Let me hit that. I'm certainly not bashing. I think we're energetically advocating for how you handle it.
Right.
The advocate is overwhelmed, and most of the people, the advocate, are super helpful. Like, they're going to help you do that. It's not going to be quick. You need to be very patient. They're going to take, because they don't actually do the resolution itself. They've got to find a partner with the IRS, and it's usually the partner that you never know about who's going to be helping the advocate help you. So you want to be like, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Advocate, thank you so much for calling me this month. Oh, you need another 30 days, no problem. I completely understand it, because when you're in the advocate, there's no levying happen, so they're protected. No. The advocate people are great. If anybody's watching, love you out there. But that wasn't my intent. It's a challenge to get the case picked up. And then it can be frustrating for practitioners to be patient. I've got an advocate case, it's pre-COVID. 6 years. Now, that's not the norm. I've had 4 different advocates because sometimes they get reassigned and then the case gets dropped. But for the most part, I want to say 6 to 8 months of follow-up before I get a resolution at least. Are you?
Yeah, similar. And it's they are our resource. And
Yes.
I've always been grateful that this one case, all I wanted is for the taxpayer to have his right to be able to be heard. And it looks like going to be able to get us back to appeals so that we have that opportunity. They have that ability. They can say, oh yeah, I see all the facts and you're right, the system did fail you. So they have the ability to be kind of on the side of us ordering them to take it up. It's not that I'm expecting them to magically, wave a wand and everything's good, but I wanted my taxpayer to have his right to appeal, and they looked at it and said, you're right, he did not have that opportunity. Let's see what we can do to fix that. So the takeaway is be very patient, know that they are more than overwhelmed because of everything happening that is broken right now, in all honesty, in the system. So they are there to help us, just as their name states, they're the advocate for us and our taxpayers that we're helping.
They're asking if there's any other assistance available.
You talking about for the advocate or in general? Or do they say?
It's like, well,
Let's- 'cause what I guess
they're
appeals
saying
is
some
what we-
kind of not nice things here, but
Oh, no, we're in trouble
it
now.
says, this is the question here, but it's basically saying, is there any other taxpayer assistance available?
So the comment, and I'll paraphrase, I was told by a tax attorney that TAS is not as helpful as we want, and they don't get back to you, can you use the appeal process. And that's where I was going is, I guess it's probably a great time to kind of, when is appeals come in, when is TAS coming in, because you and I were talking over lunch that appeals is a complete roll of the dice against the wall. Hit on that, because that was such a great point.
Unfortunately, yeah. And if we say, what are our options? Well, we do need to stay within the confines of the system if it's working and operating. So if we hit roadblocks, then we are to have, and the taxpayer has a right to appeal, to have that case heard. But it does feel like, and some of it could be training, some of it could be a variety of things, that depending on the experience level of the person you're hitting in appeals is kind of where it feels like. In my particular case, my appeals department was overwhelmed. The one that was assigned to my case left without warning, and the manager was trying to figure out how to reassign the case, and mine just kind of got dropped, unfortunately. So it is that is where we go when we want to have a secondary source hear our case. But it does feel kind of like a roll of the dice. We were talking of like, what percentage do we think? And we came up with, I think you'll agree, about a 50-50 it feels like. It's like we may get somebody that's experienced and listen and really take in the information as we're presenting it, or it may feel like an experience thing, or for some other reason that almost like we're not really being heard, in all honesty. But that's one of the resources is appeals, most definitely.
Yeah, look, appeal has its place. In your 50-50 comment, we were joking, and we both came back to that thought, is sometimes you get an appeal, someone that says, well, whatever the IRS person said is right, and I'm done. And it's like a 5-second conversation, which is frustrating. Or you can get an appeal officer who, you may not win everything, but they're like, no, I'm going to talk through this. I'm going to talk about why maybe what you were told isn't correct, and so on. I actually find with the advocate, even though it takes a while, get the case accepted, it takes a while to do, but they really do a really good job in the advocate of following the IRM, right? I'm an Internal Revenue Manual, which is their guidebook, right? Yeah, you really should have had X, Y, Z. I'm going to stay on the case with the advocate again until that's done. Whereas on this 50-50 split for appeals, if I get an appeal officer says, yeah, whatever they did was right, and I'm like, we haven't even talked about what got said. I don't even feel like I have an audience. And I never feel that way with the advocate. I actually feel like the advocate, to your point, is there for us.
And it is that appeals is supposed to operate independently. And we know that is, I guess, the rule set as to how they are to operate. But every once in a while, it does feel like they look at the information and say, oh, well, I just agree with what they already decided. So It does depend quite often sometimes who you get. Yeah. And the taxpayer advocates have been helpful, but you have to be very patient just for the level of caseloads that they have right now is causing that. It didn't used to be that way.
Okay, so we're already halfway through the session. So do you want to transition to something else on your list?
Audit.
Yeah.
You want to nail on, not bad, but tips on audit. I'll fix that now after the advocate talk.
Right, it is.
Talk about it.
It really feels like a frustrating and hard process right now. Some of the audits that I have now, as I say, recently been through, we're talking about the past 2 to 2.5 year time frame as recent. But in the cases that I've had, many times the auditors are asking for, I can tell they're newer, they're asking for more time on the case, and I'm inquisitive. Well, why do you need more time? Well, they're sending me out to learn how to do, in my case, partnership audits. Okay, but that's supposed to, yeah, so it kind of tells you, okay, this is going to be where they're at, but it is.
So you don't know what you do, how to do it, and I have to pay you to learn.
Exactly. You're causing now more time for my case,
and you're
so I
teaching
can give you.
We've talked about how we're teaching ROs and RAs,
This particular experience, too, was frustrating that I knew that this was a newer RA because we got through the process, and I had to argue, no, that adjustment. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about accounting. That's a debit adjustment, so that means it's over on this side and it's an expense. It felt like I was going back to the most rudimentary basics that really felt like I shouldn't be in that position to have to explain to them. But then it was that everything that we were doing, let me see if the manager is going to agree with it. And it just felt like a lot of roadblocks because in our local area, I think we had a lot of newer trainees, and that's been a recent experience. I don't know if you see that on your side of the country.
Without any training.
Look,
unfortunately, yeah, like very untrained level personnel is what it kind of feels like right now compared to if we fast forward, I guess going in reverse. A decade ago, it wasn't that way. It didn't seem like it was so much inexperience out there.
Yeah, lots of new revenue agents, RAs, lots of new revenue officers, ROs. And I think I was used to on the revenue agent, which is the audit side of, I've got to talk to my manager. That was almost always the case. And ACS, hey, I've got to get manager approval. I was used to that too. What has been a surprise for me post-COVID is how many of the new ROs will verbally agree to a deal with me, then go talk to their manager. I actually had a direct debit form signed. We were all done. And essentially the manager ripped it all up. I never had that pre-COVID, not one time with all the cases and ROs we work with. And so if you're getting into RO work and you can tell they're new, you know how you can tell they're new? They want to go through every pub with you. Has your client gotten pub XYZ, ABC, and you're just waiting for them to finish their spiel because they're reading a script and you know they're new, then that's the one you need to worry about, because even if they verbally agree to a deal, until the manager signs off, and I've never been one who's big to talk to managers. Most time I can get the deal done because I was used to dealing with 15, 20-year plus experienced revenue officers. They were called grade 12 or 13. You know how that works. And they could just sign off because they could sell their manager. The new ones have no ability to do that. They're too new. And so the frustration point now is, well, I guess I'm not done. Even though I have a verbal agreement with a revenue officer, I got to wait to see if the manager signs off and decides to send me a new 9297. That's the form you get with a revenue officer that lists everything they want. And they're just trying to find, I don't know, this is the old reference, Al Capone. Like everybody's Al Capone. I got to come up with a newer reference for these
Something
days,
that doesn't date us so much.
They're like Al Capone. But
So it's not like when you go to the used car salesman, and he says he has to talk to a manager who doesn't even exist. It's a real thing where they actually need to get approval.
those managers don't exist. No wonder I've always had problems buying cars. I just thought that was blowing my mind today, Alexandra. But yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And
How
they
long
can
are you
overrule.
waiting?
It depends on the case.
I don't think there's a clear answer.
No. Depends on the experience
Date of
level.
a week,
Depends.
right? Ish? Could be longer.
Well, mine was a weird experience
With
that
an RO.
everything was just much longer than it should be. As you were kind of triggered on a thought, the 9297, so the report that we get, go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure. They will do, in mine, it was going back to them and saying, well, in this case, you really should subtract this number instead of add it. There's so many instances of that, so I probably had like a dozen different revisions of that, because you would fix one thing and make an error on something else. And I was like, okay, well, you fixed that, but this other thing now is what's wrong. So go through that. Don't just take it at face value and say, well, this is the adjustment. And double check it, double check their math, double check that they've done the adjustments right. And the adjustments will be summarized, but go to the detail pages and see where that came from, because chances are that you're going to find an error in there just about with every instance. I don't know that any of them come across as perfectly adjusted.
And I think with 4 through 3F, which is the ACS personal form, the 4 through 3A, which is the revenue officer personal form. By the way, don't mix the two with each other because they get upset. They want to do their form. That's what they're trained on. You can usually walk through and find out where the mistake is. It's business 4333, which is really revenue officer, where we had a proposal and they came back and wanted 7 times as much. And this is, I bet, frustrating for you out there if you're doing this kind of work with a revenue officer on businesses, because you're wondering where these numbers are coming from they're coming back with. Because here's what we call it from the revenue officer taught me. You don't use a cash or accrual method. I call it a hybrid cash method. And if you don't know how to calculate it, which by the way is not in any instructions, I was taught the secret sauce by someone who worked there, you can't figure out where their number's coming from. So I was like insistent. We don't do a lot of in-person anymore, but I really want you to come in. You're going to walk me through. You need to reconcile your number 7 times. No way I'm agreeing to that. Go ahead and give me my denial of installment agreement. And this is where the whole pending IA, I'm like, do I have my pending IA code? I asked her. And she finally went, oh, you know what? I hadn't put it in. Well, I said, if we're going to have this meeting, I want my pending IA code, or I need to talk to your manager, which I never had to do that.
And it's across the board,
crazy.
whether on the collection side, whether on the audit side, is also know that, which is interesting on the audit side, as you go through and do that math, the things that their computer system can't do, they can't calculate depreciation. So they will come to you and say, can you give us the depreciation numbers? They can't really successfully, and it's an oddball thing when you have self-employment tax in there and you have to make an adjustment for that. The computer system always messes that up. So no matter whether you're working on the collection side, the audit side, double check the numbers and be willing to advocate for, be willing to be outspoken for your client and point out when it's wrong and say, no, you can do it in your own way. You don't have to be, and in my case, I have kind of a softer way of like, I'm pretty sure that if I add this together, that comes up with a different number. So make sure that be persistent and be willing to advocate for your client, especially when it's blatantly wrong.
The softer approach, which I
Right.
respect, right? Because that led right into my question for you. My head is that one of the reasons you like that approach, just outside of the fact that you're good at it, is you may work with that revenue agent or revenue officer again. If you're going to blow your stat because they make a mistake, you're going to get them again on another case. Yeah. So the nuance is, how do I, nice as I can, tell them they made a mistake and bring them back around? Because if I blow up now and I get them in a future case, they're going to make this so much more difficult. It was the former revenue officer who really made that point with me. Hey, you're going to see this person over and over again. You have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I had a new one assigned, and he admitted it to me. He's like, this is my first case. And it happened to be an audit. And I'm like, you know, I appreciate you telling me that, and I'm willing to help. If this was your first case, this is the first representative you worked with, but I'm going to see what I can do to make this an easy process for both of us. So really, you know, communicate to them that, you know, that your main goal is to take care of closing this case as well. That's kind of a way you can bridge that gap, is it doesn't have to be completely adversarial, and it can be, you know what, I was, you know, told or taught or in your IRM, whatever you can do to help. This is how it should be approached. And kind of can bring that back to them and see that maybe helps the overall process for sure.
One of the,
what else you got?
Well, related to audits was the preparation for audits. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Preparation for audits, it's so funny because I have the client, well, like, well, I'll just bring in the whole box and just, you know, leave it there for the auditor. Preparation is everything. So the more organized you are, the much better and better success that you'll have in that audit. So making sure that you can go to the return and that you have all the documentation, and start with your strongest points. You can kind of sort of direct which way that audit goes. If you're proving everything 100% with every receipt for this expense, and then you go to the next one and you're able to prove that, and you kind of go from strongest to weakest, that's maybe a good approach, but organization is everything to make that easier for you, easier for the revenue agent that's helping you, easier for your client. It all comes down to great organization.
And code sections too, if you have anything that's to be contested.
Absolutely. Research. So as you're putting that information together, in one of mine, I actually went back to the audit technique guide and said, in your own audit technique guide, this says how we are to approach this particular expense, laid it out for them so they had a reference. Also helps in case you have to go to appeals that you have kind of started building in that manner, because that's how you build your case for appeals. What does the code say? What does the IRM say? What does these resources that we can go to and research and help them make it easier for you and your client by pointing it out? Most definitely.
You know, I was listening to that, and it made me think about, like, for our process, I almost have if you have one of those trees that breaks off in your head, like, hey, process step here or whatever, did I do the return or not? So we get referrals all the time. I get referrals often from tax professionals. Sometimes they're like, hey, this process, what we just described, is a nightmare. I don't want to navigate that. I just want to be able to answer specific questions when it comes up. So sometimes I'm like a project manager, and I'm brought in just to navigate all this mess we've been talking about. And that CPA or EA can just, hey, it's now time. Here's the specific questions you need to answer after we produce the records, and they just get to answer that. I'll handle all the communication and follow up, because that's just a nightmare. Then the other side is sometimes I get referred returns I've never done. For that one, we'll take a look through a high level of the records, but it's hard to defend something when you don't know what you're getting into and how well it is. So the next part is, sometimes we'll redo that return with the books before the audit meeting if we have the time, because I want to know how bad this is.
Exactly.
Like, sometimes you have clues in the return. You can tell how bad it is. Like, this is not going to go well. But that's the determination. We're going to bill that time to the client. We're going to redo it all and go, oh, you need to concede X, Y, Z, or you're going to have a really rough time.
Yeah, and that kind of reminded me of that is a wonderful technique. I didn't say that often the audit cases we're working on are ones referred to us, but to take the time, we actually kind of redid their whole accounting because it was such a giant mess we couldn't tell what was what, and use that to build the new returns. So it made it kind of give us a little bit of a comparison as we're working with the auditor and saying, well, here's all the records that we redone, and they were able to accept our accounting records. Here's the return as it would have been. So it really just became, okay, if that really would be what it should have been and this is what it was, we have easier adjustments. So that isn't a bad way of going about it for sure.
And real quick, here's a tip. If you're dealing with an audit, you cannot amend a return in audit. What you can do, like we just described, doing the books work and all, you can do a draft return and give it to the auditor to start from. It's not it's not an X return, but as long as it says draft on it, they're like, oh, you're not encroaching my territory. They actually like a draft return to work from. But if you give them an X, they're like, that's my job. What do you? They get real indignant, and they can. A draft return, that starts it. It's going to help quite a bit.
It's not an amended. It is exactly that. It's saying, well, here's everything,
I've done this
make
work
their
for
job
you.
easier.
Yeah. I wanted to make your life. Oh, yeah, that's
Yes.
so much better way to say it, right? I'm here for you.
Yeah.
Let me read you all the depreciation for you.
Right,
Let's make this easy for you.
With that, we're going to take one more quick break, and you should see on the bottom of your screen the third CPE code for this session.
I think one on the
Vaughn.
right.
Alexandra's the Bell Ninja. I hope I do this right.
All right.
Right?
Well done. Okay, be sure to record that code if you plan on collecting CPE or CE credit for this session.
I think we're going to shift to your next topic.
I was thinking we got probably two high-level topics people are going to ask about, right? And I think offer and compromise is probably next on the list.
Right.
Maybe more than innocent spouse, but I know innocent spouse is frustrating. Offer and compromise. First thing off the top of your head.
Right, and offer and compromise is something that there's so much popularity because of all the past few years of radio and television commercials alone. Our clients come to us wanting offer and compromise, but the process itself can be honestly very frustrating. The time that it takes to get those heard, and then when you do, you're dealing with, and we were kind of discussing at lunch as well, how much of the time do we have that offer accepted at the first level? I don't know if you've had very many successes ever. It's almost like you can guarantee that it's not going to be accepted. And it can be very well laid out. You can have all the math, all the proof, everything there, but it seems like at that level, that's just continually what seems to happen. So you almost have to set the client and yourself up with, okay, we got to go to appeals because most likely it's not going to be accepted at that level. The way that they approach even their own rules doesn't seem like that it follows what they should. So that really has been quite often my experience. It sounds like maybe similar for you. It's not that we're the only ones out there that have had that experience for sure.
I'm thinking off the top of my head, offers and compromise, innocent spouse. If you win it on the first shot with a specialist in that group, you should have been gambling in Vegas because you're just
got
your
a
luck,
lottery
right?
ticket.
It just doesn't happen. And so you've got to prep the client that, look, if you're really serious about this, you also need a plan to pay me to appeal it. So there's a fee to do the offer, which, by the way, is more than me doing an installment agreement, whether it's we live all these letters, right? PPIA, partial payment installment agreement. By the way, people, that's real. IRS will sometimes tell you in our class that those don't happen. Those are one of those like, hey, I owe $500,000 and I'm paying $100 a month. I'll never pay it, right? Partial pay. Offers about settling this. And they just need to be prepared. Hey, my fee to do the offer is this. If I get to appeals, and I tell them 80% of the time, I've got to go to appeals to have a shot. Here's that fee, plan on paying that, or don't pay me at all because you're just wasting your money. So you set that expectation. Where I see the offer specialist do their best to kill an offer is if the offer form says, look, if you're going to pay 20% up front, you can calculate the income and expense over 12 months. If you're going to pay a monthly payment for that 2-year window of time, right?
24 months,
It's 24 months. So what they'll do is go, well, you know what, we calculated over the rest of the collection statute, which, by the way, is not in the form, and this is how much they need to pay in for us to accept the offer, which is not in the form. But you can't argue with an offer specialist nor their manager, so you need to denial the offer. And I've had really good success taking that to appeals and going, hey, just tell me in the IRM where this says you're allowed to do this calculation of the 10-year, or maybe there's 8 years left or whatever, collection statute. And they go, it's not there. And they bring it back to the math we did on the actual form, and that's where we win offers. So that's why that's the distinction, is how they kill it and how you try to keep it alive.
Yeah, and very recent history for me is one that in this particular gentleman's case, he was very close to retirement and in an industry that was physically demanding, so he knew he didn't have much more time that he could work in it. He was working overtime. He was putting everything he could effort-wise into it to save the money to pay this off because that was his goal. And they argued, no, no, well, we see that he has they told me the ability to earn what he's earning right now for the next 8 years. He was less than 6 months away from retirement, mind you. We also knew that he had very likely a pending, there was a sale of the company he worked for, that very likely he was going to lose his job at the first of the year. He actually did call me a couple weeks ago and said he lost his job. But this was so recent, and we're saying, here's all the facts, here's everything. No, we believe that he could pay this much over the 8 years ahead. And that just wasn't logical. It wasn't within the way they set out the IRM, which says 12 months or 24 months, depending how you're doing that. But that's what we're experiencing quite often within the offer unit.
We didn't prep this, so it may surprise you, right? So on the offer, we like to file at least one return that is paid in full, current, recent, before we file it. And I can talk about why. I'm just curious. I mean, you know, if you've got someone who's filed a number of years and hasn't paid and then wants to settle, all right, you know, we're about to file. Let's not do the offer today, right now. What did we, December 19th, 2024?
Right.
Let's file the 2024 return and then file the offer to show the IRS you have changed your ways. Because by the way, if you win this, and you're going to pay us a lot of money to fight this. If you win it, you have to file current and pay current for 5 years or it comes back from the dead. So prove to them. And so
and that's a perfect technique. It's going to take a while. This is not an easy or quick process by any means. So as you're doing that, you were helping our client to, you know, hey, if this gets approved, you got to make sure you have that money that you promised you're going to have. If this gets approved, you're on basically probation for the next 5 years. How do we change your ways to make sure that you don't get back in this position again? And by the way, if we happen to get it approved and everything is beautiful and rosy, you mess up within that 5 years, it all comes back with friends. So you've got to make sure that you change things, and that's one of the best ways, helping them to file and pay and not have anything more adding to it, which most of them by that point are at least eager to know what they can do to change.
We could do an easy hour on offer. So,
Right.
and I know we're out of time, so I mean, like, we'll just wrap up there. But
Yeah.
good stuff. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. That was great.
Thank you both so
Absolutely.
much.
Great.
This was
Appreciate
wonderful. We really
Always
appreciate
fun.
all of your expertise. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour, and our next session is on, whoops, I just had it right here, CPA staffing crisis, and we're going to bring AI to the rescue. So we'll see you then.